They hold just about everything we need, from condiments to cargo. Made of steel, aluminum, paper, and glass, they protect and preserve. They're underground and above ground, and they journey around the world. They've revolutionized civilization. Now, containers on Modern Marvels. In China, TVs, blue jeans, and light bulbs are being manufactured by the millions. But how do these goods get to stores in the United States? In the transport industry's ubiquitous standard shipping containers.
And to move that enormous bulk from the offshore location to the mainland, they need many, many big boxes. And the big boxes we speak of are those 45-foot containers that are traveling down the road with the blue jeans or the televisions or the tires that you see stacked in the shelves in your retail outlets.
The container's journey from source to store is a long one.
Typically, the goods are stuffed and manufactured in a distribution center somewhere in China. In this case, we'll say the Guangdong province. Then from Guangdong to the port of Hong Kong, for example, that transport is done by one of three ways. One, over the road via truck, two, via rail, or three, via smaller vessels through a river. Then it arrives to the Hong Kong port, typically between 4,000 containers to about 9,000 for the bigger ships are loaded at the Hong Kong port. Then the vessel leaves Hong Kong to the port of LA, for example. Once arriving at the port of LA, the container is unloaded. At that point, the container is loaded onto either a rail or another truck and then transported to its final destination.
The container will make about 120 trips from port to port in its approximate 10-year life.
On the journey from Far East to the mainland during typhoon season, there could potentially be 40 and 50-foot waves that rock the vessel itself to very severe pitched angles. And those containers need to withstand pounding of the open sea to protect the goods inside.
The containers are designed to hold up to 20 tons of goods, and they can be carried by 3 different modes of transportation. Without this intermodal system capability, international commerce as we know it would be almost impossible. The key to the system is the container itself. At the China International Marine Containers Factory in Shenzhen, China, new containers are turned out every 5 minutes. Huge sheets of steel are folded, bolted, and painted on an assembly line into one of 3 lengths as dictated by the International Standards Organization, or ISO. The uniform lengths are 20 feet, 40 feet, and 45 feet. Most containers today are of the 40-foot variety. Each container is also manufactured in such a way that they're easily interlocked.
When containers are loaded on vessels, they're connected to one another using a device called a twist lock. There's also rod lashing, which is essentially rods that are lashed to the sides of the container to make them more sturdy when they're stacked on top of one another.
Before containerization, cargo handling took much more time and muscle.
The maritime industry is one that's steeped in tradition, and for centuries, goods were loaded and unloaded much in the same way. Freight was moved using cargo nets and grappling hooks to be taken out of cargo holds, at which time a crew of stevedores would then take the freight and rearrange it onto a pallet, which would then be lifted again onto either a carriage or a buggy or even a truck.
Then in 1955, Malcolm McLean, a trucking entrepreneur from North Carolina, acquired a steamship company and changed the industry forever. He removed the wheels from his trucks, strengthened the sides of the trailers, and stacked them on his ship's deck. His prototype container ship, the Ideal X, with 58 trailers on deck, made its inaugural voyage from New Jersey to Texas in 1956. His enterprise became Sealand Services, an international shipping company, and McLean became known as the father of containerization. Around the same time, Oakland-based Matson Navigation Company conducted research on ways to control rising costs. It discovered that loading and unloading freight in the traditional manner was slow and expensive.
As a result of this research, Matson developed its own containerization program, which effectively revolutionized the movement of goods in the Pacific Rim. In 1958, Matson moved its first containers out of San Francisco Bay. There were 20 containers that moved on Matson's Hawaiian Merchant. It was an enormous change in the way the Hawaiian economy was serviced from the mainland.
Containerization sparked a waterfront metamorphosis. Crane operators eventually replaced the gangs of longshoremen who once defined the loading docks. In order to move the heavy steel containers, the gantry crane, or portainer, was developed. It required only one driver in a cab high above the pier to move cargo from ship to shore. As more shipping companies began using containers, their standardization and interchangeability became crucial to the success of the intermodal system. All the transport industries had to adapt.
For example, for trucks, we had to make the chassis and the beds of the truck to be able to fit 20 and 40 footers. Rail, we had to do the same thing. We had to make sure that the bridges or any overpasses, at least in the United States, could fit too high. And for vessels, we had to make sure that the vessel slots that the containers go into are 8 foot wide, 8.5 foot tall, and obviously 20 or 40 foot.
By 2005, approximately 90% of all cargo moved by standardized containers. But as freight containers came to facilitate global trade, the world became a more dangerous place.
After 9/11, obviously, security has gone up exponentially. There have been many noted examples where unauthorized terrorists have been in a container using that to smuggle a terrorist into the United States. Another example could be inserting a weapon of mass destruction into the container itself.
So companies like GE Security have developed a smart device to secure the container during its vulnerable voyage.
The manner in which we install the container security device on the already existing 13 million containers is much like a Lego piece is installed. The CSD simply snaps on to the door frame of the ISO container.
The device has a magnetic sensor that monitors container door openings and a central processing unit that records the time of those events. The antenna is the only piece that is outside the container. After loading, the shipper accesses the system, logs in an access code, registers the container number, and authorizes sealing the container. In response, the device will transmit a data log each time the door has been opened and resealed, or whenever it's electronically queried. Before the container arrives at port, the United States Customs and Border Protection has analyzed it from a security perspective.
Based upon their risk rules, they will choose to inspect anywhere from as low as, say, 1% to upwards around 8 to 10% of those containers, depending on what they feel is the risk profile of that container. One way is via technology to do an X-ray of the box, for example, to see if there are any weapons of mass destruction in it. Another way is to physically open the box and actually check the contents.
In the near future, containers with this device may clear customs in far less time, ultimately getting products to our stores safer and faster. After the shipping container has been opened at distribution warehouses, there are usually more containers inside. Like nesting dolls, hundreds of smaller containers fit snugly inside hundreds of boxes, which sit inside the large cargo container. And the wonder material that holds most of the small containers together is corrugated fiberboard. With paper made from farmed southern pine trees and up to 70% recycled fiber, this Georgia-Pacific factory in Richmond, Indiana, produces 65,000 tons of corrugated fiber a year. You probably call these cardboard boxes, but the industry begs to differ.
If you look at most boxes or most containers, they used to be made out of layers and layers of fine paper that makes a board, and they used to call that cardboard. And a lot of packaging was made out of the cardboard back then. Now there's a lot more product out there that's made more out of the corrugate or out of the corrugated sheets that we make.
In 1890, a Brooklyn printer and paper bag maker named Robert Gare invented the corrugated carton. And ultimately, changed the way we pack and ship today. Today's corrugated boxes are stronger and use less paper than cardboard boxes.
The boxes we make here are made of 3 different components. You have right here, which is what we call the liner part of the board. It's a brown, typically looks like a craft paper bag out of a grocery store. The inside of the box is what we call a medium, which we flute.
It's a very similar process to someone who might be ironing the wrinkles out of a shirt, but we're ironing wrinkles into our sheets. We are taking heat to condition the paper and steam to make it receptive to forming the flute shapes, and then starch to be the glue or the bond to take the 2 separate pieces of paper and glue them together. So similar to 2 sets of gears coming together, the medium will go down in between them and be formed into the flutes.
Architects have known for thousands of years that an arch with a proper curve is the strongest way to span a given space. The same principle applies to corrugated fiberboard. Arches in the corrugated medium, when anchored to the liner board, resist bending and pressure from all directions. When a piece of combined board is placed on its end, the arches form rigid columns, capable of supporting a great deal of weight. When pressure is applied to the side of the board, the space between the flutes acts as a cushion to protect the container's contents. After the medium is fluted in the almost 300-foot-long corrugator, the final layer is glued to the fiberboard.
So then at that point, you have 2 of the 3 substrates joined together, and they will then travel to the other end of the machine where we will apply a cold glue, which is a polyvinyl acetate, very similar to an Elmer's glue, and we will put another thin adhesion of glue on the flute tips and then bond the printed liner on top of that.
This machine takes the sheets that we just saw laminated. We feed them through this line 1 sheet at a time. They're delivered to a cutting station where I'm literally cutting them like a cookie cutter. I've got cutting roll, I've got creasing roll inside the die that can actually cut out the board and crease it where it's supposed to be creased. It goes on to station 2 where we literally strip out the scrap.
Scraps are recycled into new boxes immediately.
Once it's stripped, it's delivered to a pallet, and they're taken flat off to the next station.
The finished box is folded and glued into various shapes to fit and protect everything from juice to toys.
We can take a blank like this. With the fold and gluer, we can turn it into a carton like this. You can also take a blank in this form. We can turn it into something that'll pack flat in the case for the customer so that at their end, they can just pop it and fill it.
America's corrugated container board is so highly prized that more than 660,000 tons of it are exported to factories throughout the world in standardized shipping containers. Both the containers and the boxes can hold a lot of goods, but what if you've got to store America's petroleum reserve or its food surplus? You'll need the biggest containers in the world. In 2004, the value of containerized cargo entering United States ports totaled more than $750 billion. Containers will return on Modern Marvels, here on the History Channel. When it comes to containers, none rival the size of the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Located along the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, the SPR has a capacity of 727 million barrels of oil.
The Strategic Petroleum Reserve actually has 4 different facilities where we store crude oil, 2 in Louisiana and 2 in Texas.
The crude oil contained in the SPR is housed in natural underground geologic formations, salt domes.
A lot of people don't realize the size of salt domes in the Gulf Coast area. This particular dome is called Bryan Mound. The Bryan Mound Dome is located approximately 2,000 feet from the surface of the Earth, and at the 2,000-foot contour, it is approximately 1.5 miles wide.
Within Bryan Mound and other SPR salt domes are massive cylindrical caverns where the crude oil is stored. The entire SPR contains 62 of these mammoth caverns.
We currently have 20 caverns here at Bryan Mound with a total capacity of 254 million barrels subsurface.
If you can imagine the size of the Astrodome, if we were to fill up the Astrodome with crude oil, it would be equivalent to the amount that we can fill up one of our caverns.
In 1975, President Gerald Ford signed the Energy Policy and Conservation Act, which created the SPR. This was a direct response to the economic crisis generated by the OPEC oil embargo of 1973-74. The country needed a safety net for future political, economic, and natural disasters that might threaten the supply of one of America's most vital resources. The daunting question: where to contain hundreds of millions of barrels of oil?
The thoughts that were brought up were above-ground storage, underground storage. They realized that the Gulf Coast was the most feasible location to store crude oil underground in salt domes. The majority of the refining process is located in the Gulf Coast. The pipelines are located in the Gulf Coast. And there were actually some salt domes that already had some leached caverns, solution-mined caverns.
Unlike traditional salt mining, which uses machines to dig for the salt, solution mining injects millions of gallons of water into salt domes to create caverns.
It's a process in which we use raw water to dissolution the salt, much like you would dissolve table salt at your house. And we use approximately 7 barrels of raw water to create 1 barrel of cavern space.
The way that these underground containers are performed or created is the introduction or the drilling of 2 holes approximately 4,000 feet into the salt dome itself. Now those holes then have extended casings in it, a pipe within a pipe, and we introduce water into those pipes, the inner pipe, and begin to dissolve the salt. The dissolved salt becomes brine, and the brine comes out the annulus or the outer pipe.
As the brine is extricated, crude oil takes its place and is stored until needed. The oil benefits from the natural high-temperature subsurface.
The geotechnical heating of the crude oil keeps it at a consistent composition because we have homogeneity across the crude oil.
In order to extract the oil from its underground reservoir, the SPR performs a drawdown.
We pump raw water in through the brine stream to the bottom of the cavern. It displaces the crude oil, which is on top of the brine, and that comes out through our crude oil header.
Oil is lighter than water, so the 2 substances naturally separate. The oil is then segregated, metered, and distributed to various terminals and refineries. An SPR drawdown only occurs under very specific circumstances.
The President of the United States has authority to release a full-scale drawdown, which means we release oil from our facilities at 4.4 million barrels a day. He also has the authority to do a limited drawdown, which allows the release of up to 30 million barrels of crude oil. The second person that is authorized to release oil from our facilities is the Secretary of Energy.
There have only been 2 drawdowns since the SPR was instituted. A drawdown was authorized after 2005's Hurricane Katrina. 140-mile-an-hour winds had torn through the Gulf Coast, damaging refineries and pipelines that feed the entire United States. And the SPR served the purpose for which it was intended: to ease the stresses of economic, geopolitical, and natural disasters.
We have to be ready when the president so decrees to go into full drawdown mode in which we can supply the country with crude oil. And we have to be ready like almost the military in that regard.
The Strategic Petroleum Reserve may be the largest underground container in the world. But there are other containers that hold vast riches above ground. Silos.
We're standing on the 110-foot high silo, 60-foot diameter, and this is the one that holds 250,000 bushel.
A silo's height means it can have a small footprint and still contain tremendous amounts of whatever needs storing, like grain, sand, or corn, to name but a few. Grain elevators and feed plants are comprised of multiple silos. Although a seemingly simple structure, a silo is actually a very complex edifice. At the Kroll family farm in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania, a construction crew from the Sollenberger Silos Corporation builds a new farm silo, utilizing the jump form method.
If you look at the forms, they're 4 foot high, and there's 3 4-foot forms on the concrete now. After they finish pouring the concrete in one form, the crewman will break the forms loose, and then they will push those out and jump them up to the next level. So that's why we call them jump forms.
Pouring the concrete involves precision and speed.
He moves the buggy continuously around so that the concrete fills the form level. He doesn't want to put it all in one place because it'll try to bulge the forms out. And so he fills it up even all the way around.
Steel rebar supports are placed in the concrete.
Engineers have designed these silos based on the material that's stored. If we store shell corn, there's a lot of horizontal pressure, and so we need more steel. That gives us the strength in the silo walls.
When completed, this farm silo will stand 92 feet high and contain 28,888 cubic feet of storage space. Today's silos are epic versions of their predecessors. Agricultural scientist Franklin Hiram King patented the first silo in 1889. King's silo was a modified barn, cylindrical in shape. He knew that the cylinder structure was strong and reduced the likelihood of spoilage. King's silo finally evolved into this behemoth, the largest farm silo in the United States. It stands 148 feet tall in Berks County, Pennsylvania.
In this big silo, there's over 90,000 cubic feet of storage capacity. And the Goodyear blimp has about 70,000 cubic feet, so this is bigger than the Goodyear blimp.
For most modern silos, concrete is king.
I always say concrete's for life. It takes very little maintenance, and you can put just about anything in it.
Silos and the SPR storage tanks are certainly impressive. But there's another small and humble container we use every day that's changed the course of our world: the metal can. One storage cavern in the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve is large enough to contain the 1,450-foot Sears Tower, with room to spare. Containers will return on Modern Marvels, here on the History Channel. Containers on Modern Marvels. The metal can, one of our most important containers. This seemingly simple device revolutionized the food and beverage industry. The shelves of grocery stores around the world and our own kitchen cabinets are filled with every conceivable shape and size.
It's so common that people don't realize how much work and effort goes into making a can. First of all, the speeds at which cans are made boggle people's minds pretty much.
For the last 125 years, Ball Corporation has been a leader in the food and beverage container industry. At their Golden, Colorado metal beverage plant, Ball creates billions of perfect cans.
Most can lines are designed to run around 2,000 a minute. We're making well over 100 million a day just in our plants. Each year, when you look at our industry, we're making 100 billion.
Production begins with 12,000-pound aluminum coils that unspool into a machine called a cupper.
The cupper creates this piece of product that is really the very first process of making a two-piece can. This process knocks out 12 of these at once, and these are then conveyed to a machine called the body maker.
The body maker drives a steel form into the cup, which extends the aluminum.
You can see here that it's untrimmed. It's a little rough on the top.
Before the can exits the body maker, the top is cut to its standard size, and a pressure dome is created.
Has the pressure dome here, which resists the carbonation from bulging it out. This can is then trimmed to have what we call a factory finish, so that every can has this nice trimmed height, and they're all exactly the same after this point.
Each can then journeys to a system of washers and dryers that produce clean containers ready for their next phase, the printer.
The printer is essentially the machine that paces the entire can line. It'll speed up or slow down, and the rest of the can line has to sort of behave in the same manner.
The printer uses up to 8 different colors of ink to design intricate labels. Then a fine lacquer covers the artwork. From here, the cans enter an oven that bakes on the ink and lacquer.
And then that can goes from that oven into what we call internal spray machines. And these spray the inside of the can with a coating, and then that is baked on as well. So you've got no metal exposure.
At each phase of the production line, the cans must be flawless, or else they're discarded and recycled. The final step prior to shipping is to create a neck and flange on the can.
We put a neck and a flange on the can. This neck and the flanging gives it a lot of strength, and it prepares it for the end, which comes on after the can is filled with product. An end comes on, and this flange is then rolled into what we call a double seam, which gives it a hermetic seal. Product is perfectly preserved from light or oxygen, and nothing comes out of the can either until you open it.
The cans are then aligned onto pallets, marked for transport, and sent to the warehouse to await delivery. But making food and beverage containers hasn't always been this fast or streamlined. The sterile container can be traced back to an 18th century French general, Napoleon Bonaparte.
In 1795, as he was trying to conquer Europe, he was having a very difficult time obtaining the necessary foodstuffs for his armies. And he went back to the French government, and they actually started a contest to develop a feeding system that would make food non-perishable. And a fellow by the name of Nicholas Appert in 1795 took on the project.
It took almost 15 years, but Nicholas Appert was successful. He partially cooked food, put it in a glass container, corked it, and then boiled the bottle. Englishman Peter Durand had a different idea. He started working with metal instead of glass in the early 1800s.
And he figured out a way to use the metal can as opposed to glass, doing basically the same process, but the metal can was much more durable, it didn't break, and the result was that Durand's process was much more sterile and had more longevity.
Durand combated rust buildup in his iron cans with a tin lining that protected the food. He then soldered on a lid after the can was filled. That was the dawn of the tin can. Durand's innovations soon found many practical applications, including the preservation of fruit and vegetables, which could now retain their vital nutritional value. Scurvy, which had been the bane of many an English seaman, ended. Sailors who had once starved for nutrients could now withstand long voyages. By the time of the American Civil War, Union soldiers relied on canned food for survival almost as much as gunpowder.
It became something that allowed civilization to do things other than just forage for their food. So the preservation of food in a safe manner allowed them to begin to do other things. And, you know, that was really the beginning of industrialization.
In the decades to follow, automation caused the tin can industry to flourish. During the Second World War, the can's value became deeply rooted in the minds of American GIs.
2/3 of the food served to the soldiers in the Second World War was canned food. And then they came home, and families were dispersing and going elsewhere, and the result was that they had a real confidence in canned food.
In the post-war era, food in a can became a staple in every home and propelled the industry forward.
In North America, today we process 33.5 to 34 billion cans of food every single year. The metal container has been threatened by other forms of packaging, plastic and flexible packaging and things like that. And I can honestly tell you that I've seen the obituary written for the metal can several times. But when all is said and done, the metal container is still going to survive.
While the metal can may hold the distinction as the world's most important container, another can with a clever innovation nearly eclipsed its importance: the aerosol can. The aerosol can came into its own in the 1940s. Again, war proved to be the impetus for significant innovation. the U.S. government funded research for a portable container that soldiers could easily carry and use to spray disease-carrying insects. This device proved invaluable for the troops in the Pacific Theater, where malaria was rampant. This insecticide spray is credited with saving thousands of soldiers' lives. The proven success of the aerosol can in war soon expanded to the home front, where families applied everything from hairspray to medicine with increasing ease. An aerosol can is made of steel or aluminum and works with the use of a propellant. The propellant is a gas. When the nozzle at the top is depressed, the force of the gas pushing down on the product causes it to move through the dip tube and finally exit the nozzle. The narrow nozzle atomizes the liquid and forms a fine mist. Early aerosol cans used liquefied gas that contained chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. But scientists discovered that CFCs cause detrimental effects on the ozone layer. They were removed from more than 90% of all aerosols in the U.S. by 1978. In the 1980s, CFCs were banned worldwide, but manufacturers soon devised harmless propellants. Today's aerosol industry manufactures over 3 billion containers each year. And although the can sealed its place in society, a resealable plastic container put the lid on fresh food, changing our kitchens forever. A sealed tin container of roasted veal from one of Sir William Parry's Arctic expeditions in the 1820s was opened in 1938. The contents were then fed to a cat with no ill effects. Containers will return on Modern Marvels. In the United States, 36 billion glass containers are produced per year. They'll hold everything from baby food to pickles. At the OI factory in Vernon, California, they make 1 million glass bottles a day. The 6-step manufacturing process starts with raw materials.
This is the batch house facility. As you can see, there's a number of silos here where we store our raw materials. Silica sand, limestone, soda ash, and cullet, which is our recycled glass. And within this facility, we weigh it, we mix it, and we then deliver it to the furnaces via a conveyor system.
The fiery furnace that is approximately 5 feet deep converts the raw materials into molten glass.
This furnace consists of high-temperature ceramic brick of many different sizes and shapes and weights. It contains about 500 tons of molten glass at about 2,800 degrees.
After the glass is melted in the furnace, it's delivered to the forming machine. The molten glass gets sheared into uniform pieces called gobs, and then blown into the mold shape with compressed air. The glass enters the forming machine at 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. Formed glass containers leave the machine at 900 degrees Fahrenheit in less than 10 seconds. This rapid cooling helps the glass retain its shape. The extreme change in temperature can cause stress in the bottles if they're not cooled properly. Therefore, the formed containers are loaded into an annealing leer, where their temperature is raised to 1,000 degrees, then reduced gradually to below 200 degrees. This reheating and slow cooling eliminates the stress in the containers, making them stronger and more shock resistant.
After the annealing process is complete and the bottles have cooled down to about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, we apply a coating on the outside of the bottles. The coating protects the bottles against abrasion and scratches, thereby enhancing the strength characteristics of the container.
Each bottle is inspected. Those that don't pass get sent back to the fire.
After inspection, some of our bottles are bulk palletized rather than being put into cartons. This machine right here puts our bottles on top of a pallet 9 layers high. We then strap them to the pallet in preparation for shipment to the customer.
The highly mechanized system that runs 24/7 in over 81 OI plants worldwide turn raw materials into billions of transparent, strong containers a year. It's taken glassmakers thousands of years to reach this level of speed and efficiency. Around 1500 BC, Egyptian craftsmen developed a method for producing the first glass pots by dipping a core mold of compacted sand into molten glass and then turning the mold so that the glass adhered to it. While still soft, the glass-covered mold was rolled on a slab of stone in order to smooth or decorate it. Then, sometime between 27 BC and 14 AD in Syria, the blowing of glass transformed glass container making. Glass blowing has basically remained unchanged. Once the glass is heated into a semi-liquid, it's placed at the end of a rod called a punty. The glass blower then blows into the punty to shape the glass into different formed containers. By 1880, more than 25% of the glass made in America was used for common bottles that were arduously blown one at a time. In 1903, all that changed with an invention by a young glassblower from Ohio.
The first fully automatic bottle machine invented by Mike Owens would make 9 bottles per minute. And to put that in perspective, the output of that machine in one day would have required 36 men and boys working for 18 hours blowing bottles by hand.
High-speed filling and packing lines soon followed. The O in OI stands for Owens, and it's the legacy of his machine on which the company has built its global container business. It continues to produce billions of glass containers every year. Before the post-war era in the 1940s, glass and metal containers were the most common options available to store food. That is, until a man named Earl Tupper revolutionized food storage and preparation.
Well, before Earl Tupper came along, this was still a time before most refrigerators, many people were still having ice delivered to their home. Food containers were basically designed to store for a day or so.
In the 1940s, the plastic industry was still in its infancy. Plastic containers were difficult to market because they were known to be brittle, greasy, smelly, and generally unreliable. Therefore, Tupper developed 2 important innovations in plastic technology.
He helped to develop the process of refining polyethylene slag. Polyethylene slag is essentially this black substance that is a byproduct of oil refinement in the petroleum industry. Through this process, he was able to develop a material that was very durable, that was flexible, great for food conservation. It was a material that was non-porous and even translucent.
And he developed the Tupper Seal, an airtight and watertight lid modeled on a common hardware store item.
He was in a hardware store one day, and he saw a paint can, and he noticed that the paint can, there was a seal in the center of the paint can. And he got the idea, if I made the seal go around the outer edges of a bowl, this would be compatible with a need that was coming of age as people were buying refrigerators in the post-war years.
The seal was able to seal in things like moisture so that the food did not dry out. It kept the food from wilting, basically maintained the overall taste and texture of the food as well for long-term conservation.
With housewives demonstrating the revolutionary seal at Tupperware parties, sales skyrocketed. Soon everyone's macaroni and egg salads were kept fresh in Tupperware containers. Tupperware and other container manufacturers needed to develop new technology in the late 1970s, when the microwave oven entered the kitchen. But it was the TV dinner container that would have to change the most. The conventional aluminum tray and the microwave oven were a particularly bad match.
They didn't have anything inside the oven cavity to absorb the microwave energy. So if you put metal in, it reflected back to what we call the magnetron. That's what generates the microwaves. The waves would reflect back, heat it up, and burn it out.
1986 saw the first microwave oven-safe plastic and paperboard containers. Today, about 2 billion meals in microwavable containers are sold annually in the United States. With technology changing the look and use of containers, designers constantly have to think outside of the box. In London, 2 developers have done just that. And now, people are living inside the box. Glass can be recycled an infinite number of times. Recycling just 1 glass bottle saves enough electricity to light a 100-watt bulb for 4 hours. containers will return on Modern Marvels, here on the History Channel. Enough shipping containers exist on our planet to build an 8-foot-high wall around the equator, twice. For the containers that have completed their tour of duty at sea, a visionary group of developers have found a second life for them. Eldon Scott and Eric Reynolds of Urban Space Management built Container City in the heart of London's Docklands area.
Container City looks like Lego bricks, sort of red, orange and yellow bricks stacked on top of each other in a seemingly quite random style. And they have these little balconies, which was also made of containers, and railings across the front.
A container's final destination is usually the scrapyard, but these containers were destined for greater things.
The cheapest form of construction is an existing box, which is what the container is. The container supplies, when you buy it, everything. It's got the floor, the walls and the roof. Apart from that, they're very strong. They're quite capable of being put into quite funky arrangements.
Scott and Reynolds converted the bulky cargo containers into comfortable live workspaces.
When people hear that you live in a container, they think you're living in a drippy, awful, cold tin can. And they say, well, winter's coming, you're going to be terribly cold. I think, no, they're insulated. You know, we have electricity, we have running water, you know, it's actually very civilized.
To keep costs low, the architects used 100% recycled materials.
An international standard container is exactly that. They are precisely within a couple of millimetres the same size at the corners, because all those corners join together. So that's a wonderful thing about building with them, of course, that you don't have the problem you do with, say, bricks or blocks, which come in slightly different sizes and you have to make it up with cement. Containers, you know, are going to be perfect, so you can buy them anywhere and they all work.
It took 5 months to erect Container City 1, which opened in May 2001 and provided 12 work studios. In 2003, another floor was added in less than 2 days that provided 3 additional live-work apartments. A total of 100 units now make up Container City.
There was enough demand, and again to prove a point, that because these things are designed to stack, they literally pop on top of each other, we put another floor on it.
A 300-square-foot space, the size of one container, costs about $80 to $140 per month to rent. The success of Container City led to a boom in other container buildings for schools, hospitals, and sports centers.
We have accidentally found ourselves actually running a business making these things. They were initially for ourselves.
Urban Space Management has gone global with their livable containers. They're making sales in South America, Pakistan, and Australia. However, they might have competition in Australia. There, architect Sean Godsell is turning shipping containers into emergency and relief housing for people who are displaced by disasters, like Hurricane Katrina. His concept, named Future Shack, is designed to be mass-produced, inexpensive, and easy to ship and stockpile. The shacks are completely self-contained and can be erected in 24 hours. The inside is lined with plywood walls that contain built-in furniture. There is also a separating wall that houses plumbing necessities. Godsell added only a few exterior changes. Several additional slots used to secure the structure to a foundation, a top-hinged front opening for the entrance, and a series of operable panels in the roof for ventilation. Despite the alterations, the shack maintains its seaworthiness and its ability to be shipped anywhere in the world, just like its unmodified predecessor. Architects and city planners across the globe are taking note of these modular ideas. Homes, offices, studios, and vital infrastructure soon may be shipped into a neighborhood near you. After all, a good new container is never out of style.